Welcome. It is Friday morning, November 22nd, 2024, and this is Political Dharma with Alan Zundell. Today, I want to do some follow up on what I had been covering most of the last year, which is the non major party candidates for the presidency. I want to look at what they are doing now, insofar as I've been able to find out anything that looks significant. Of course, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has been nominated to the Department of Health and Human Services by incoming President Donald Trump. I'll cover that a bit. And then the Green Party candidates for president and vice president, Jill Stein and Butch Ware, are also showing some signs of life as well that I'll talk about. And then finally, I want to move over to the ballot questions on ranked choice voting and give you an update on what's happening in Alaska. Okay. Now, there may be breaking news later today on Friday that I don't get to because I'm doing this early on Friday. But the reason I'm doing it Friday instead of Saturday is that my grandkids are coming for a sleepover this evening, and I expect to be pretty busy, have my hands full tomorrow morning. While I'm digressing, let me also remind you all that no matter where you're listening to me, there are alternative platforms that you may use more regularly in which you can also find this podcast. I'm on YouTube, Rumble. I have a Patreon channel. I'm just now doing shorts and started on Instagram. So, any of you on Instagram, I would really appreciate if you get on, look for Political Dharma, and follow me so I can get a start in that platform. And then finally, on Spotify, I have both video and audio versions of the podcast, as well as audio versions on a number of other podcasting platforms. So you can listen to me as you exercise or do your household errands or put your phone on in your car or however you like to listen to podcasts. So let's get into it. Let's start with what's happening with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his nomination to the cabinet level Department of Health and Human Services. All right, so this article from, I think it's from Politico, just yesterday said that he is setting up meetings with the Republican senators in the U.S. Senate who are going to be deciding his fate as a nominee. Of course, he has to get confirmed by the Senate to any position that is cabinet level. There's a bunch of positions that need Senate confirmation. That's just a majority vote, but he has to get through a committee hearing and convince them to move him forward to the whole Senate, and then his name will be taken to the whole Senate, and they'll have some kind of debate about it. So he is lining up those interviews, and as I mentioned before, there are forces that are lining up to try to keep him from that nomination. I had a segment in my video about a week ago. He's had lobbyists in a frenzy over his nomination. And this article from Politico just a couple of days ago also says that there's a number of healthcare organizations that are strategizing together how to keep him out of that. So they're talking to senators, trying to exploit their connections. They're also talking to state legislators and governors where they have allies to try to get them to weigh in with their state senators. So it says here, I've highlighted one place. This is an article from Megan Messerly saying that more than 200 people from several dozen different groups, along with other advocacy organizations, which I assume means for one reason or another, they are opposing Kennedy, even though they're not healthcare related, discuss strategies to oppose Kennedy's nomination. So there is a movement, a definite movement to try to block his nomination and keep it from happening, much as what happened with Matt Gaetz earlier this week, Trump's original nominee to be on the to be the Attorney General of the United States. And I'll say a word about that in a minute. But what I wanted to say about Kennedy in this context is that I don't think he will have the same kind of problems that Matt Gaetz had, because he is much better, I think, at answering questions and building relationships with people. In his various positions that are being criticized, he does have good answers that I think would convince people, and or at least persuade the persuadable. I saw this article. This is from the Washington Post by Leanna S. Wen, who is an MD and a columnist for the Washington Post on medical topics. And the headline here is Why Debate Over Fluoridation is No Longer Settled. And she says she started out with the intention of writing a column against Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s nomination to HHS because she was concerned about his idea of keeping fluoride out of public water systems. So that was her intention, to write an article saying why that was a bad idea. So she went in and looked at the most recent research. And here is a quote from her article. "When I delved into the research, I was shocked. The data clearly indicates that conventional wisdom needs to be revisited." So what I take away from that, I didn't read that literature, so I can't comment on the fluoride debate. But what I could say is that in Kennedy's case, he has done some research. Now, whether everybody will find his positions uh, well-founded or in line with the best research, that's another question. But he is not someone who has no answers for this. He has looked into this stuff. So I think he'll do better in the Senate than Matt Gaetz, particularly as he's far from the most controversial nomination that Trump has made. Is both Matt Gaetz, and here is a little article, again from Politico. I'm drawing from them a lot this week, apparently, by Kyle Cheney. Matt Gaetz dropped out of the nomination, withdrew his nomination just yesterday. And the headline of this one is "Donald Trump Gets a Brutal Reality Check," meaning that he ran into such opposition from the US Senate, especially with new revelations about Gaetz' alleged sexual encounters with a 17-year-old minor, that this is somehow showing a sign that Trump can be pushed back on. I think that part is true, but I don't think the reality check was for Trump. I think it was for Matt Gaetz, thinking that Trump would stick by somebody when he became a liability. So I do think this is encouraging, at least to those who are afraid of Trump's tendencies to try to steamroller everything and get his way without consultation with people who may be better informed about somebody. So there was elements of the Republican establishment in the US Senate, at least, that formed a barrier to Trump getting his way, and Trump backed down. Gaetz wouldn't have withdrawn if the Trump campaign or the Trump emerging administration transition team had not told him it is time for you to go. So here is a sign that Trump, at least at this point, is not going to try to just muscle his way through getting what he wants in the US government, but at least in this case, he's going to pull back. There is a couple other candidates that people were more concerned about than Matt Gaetz. I mean, than Robert Kennedy. They were very concerned about Matt Gaetz, who is, according to reports, very unpopular in both houses of the US Congress. Also, this guy, what is his name? Something Hegswith has been Pete Hegswith, nominated to the Department of Defense, and he has military background. I don't know how high up in the military. He's a veteran, and he is a Fox News broadcaster. So apparently that's why Trump nominated him, and there's a lot of resistance to him as well. It may happen that the fights over these nominees, who are, at least in the eyes of the US Senate, not qualified for the job, will exhaust the senators. And by the time they get around to Kennedy, they will be feeling like, okay, we got to let them have a win, particularly the Republican senators who have a majority now in the Senate. So I'm not sure how much pushback Kennedy will get. I think he may get through this process. Hard to tell. Of course, the US Congress the new Congress takes its seats and swears its oath of office on January 3rd. You remember, on January 6th is the day when they count the electoral votes for the president, but the new Congress is sworn in a few days ahead of time, so they're there to count the votes. And then Trump is scheduled to be inaugurated on, let's see what it is, January 20th is the inauguration day, so that's a few weeks later. And then will be the time when his nominees, like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who have survived the initial process of just getting a temperature check in the Senate, will be before hearings in committees. So if he gets that far, which I think he has a good chance of getting, I'll be watching some of those hearings to see how it's going and what's happening and covering some of it for you. So that's what happened with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I did also want to make a note as the votes came in on the two major parties. It is very, very close. And I talked about the alternative parties, But here you can see how small a sliver all these other candidates ended up being in the election. So Donald Trump, as of the most recent count, and there are not that many remaining ballots to be counted, he had 49.86% of the popular vote, which is not a majority, although it's very close to being exactly half. And then Kamala Harris had 48.24% of the popular vote, which is a difference of roughly what, 1.5 percentage points, which is the what all the other candidates combined, the minor party candidates, independent candidate. There was a few independent candidates, but in particular Cornel West, and then all the write-in votes, all those votes combined are less than 2%, which is very bad showing for alternative candidates who my interest is in alternative candidates. Apparently, a lot of people, when the election happens, they're not that interested. But I did want to also say a word about the Democratic Party. And if you're interested, okay, I've talked about Kennedy as he is being integrated into the Trump administration. Because I'm interested in the realignment happening in the Republican Party, Trump has displaced the traditional coalition in the Republican Party and brought in new elements. And it's in the process of getting settled who has power within this coalition and who does not. But in the Democratic side, because they lost the election closely, although the Electoral College was not that close because Trump got the margins he needed in all the swing states, so he got a lot of Electoral College votes. On the Democratic side, they're also trying to jockey for position going into the future. Now, without an incumbent president or even a president-elect to give a unifying face to the party, it falls to the chair of the Democratic National Committee to try to plan for the next presidential election and try to get all the party actors in the states and in the Congress and all trying to work together toward a common vision of what they're looking for so they can have a smooth process in the next presidential electoral cycle. So if you're interested in how that coalition is shaping up, the thing to watch is the race for chair of the Democratic National Committee, which will happen sometime early next year. And there's already over a half a dozen people, I think, who are announced that they are running for that. And of course, some of them, all of them are talking about we need to focus more on the working class, which they lost to the Republicans. By that, they mean non-college educated voters who have jobs more in blue collar and service jobs. And the progressives are also on board with that. But how far they go in terms of allowing progressives like the AOC, Bernie Sanders wing of the party to get more control over the process, get somebody. Bernie Sanders is backing one of the candidates for the Democratic National Committee. No, actually for the vice chair. So, but that will be a sign if they're giving them some voice in the party as it plans for the next presidential election. So that's something to watch if you're interested in how the Democrats are going. Where are we at then? Let's see. Well, the next thing was what's happening in some of the minor parties. And here I want to focus in particular on the Green Party. Green Party, now you may remember that I had a story that near the election, just before the election, Green Party candidate Jill Stein and the candidate of the Socialism and Libertarian Party, there I go again, Socialism and Liberation Party, Claudia de La Cruz and Cornel West made agreements to help support each other in states in the election where they were not on the ballot. So if one was not on the ballot and another was, the one not on the ballot would ask their supporters to vote for the one that was. Anyway, they formed this arrangement and they said they wanted to continue to cooperate after the election. So one side of that here is I think it's the Party of Socialism and Liberation that is behind the planning for this, but there's going to be a demonstration or demonstrations on Inauguration Day, January 20th, when President Trump becomes president again. Former president becomes current president, or former president, now president-elect, becomes the actual president again. Anyway, they're planning demonstrations in Washington, D.C., as well as in states around the nation. And both Jill Stein and Claudia de La Cruz are working on this. This article is from the Independent Political Report, and the headline says, Presidential candidates Jill Stein, Claudia de La Cruz among coordinators for planned Inauguration Day demonstration. So we see people on the left protesting Trump's um, presidency, already organizing together. Maybe that will be good in the long term. Now, Stein's vice presidential running mate was Butch Ware. He uses that nickname Butch. I always forget what his actual name is, but Butch Ware, he announced, as he had hinted at during the campaign, that he will run for governor of California in 2026, which is coming up 2 years from now. He is one of a number of people who have announced for that role, mostly Democrats. There's been, I think, about 7 or so Democrats who are already saying they're going to run for that. And then there are also a couple of Republicans and Nicole Shanahan, who had been Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s vice presidential running mate, had talked during the campaign, especially when they came close to suspending their campaign. She talked about running for governor of California because she lives in California as well. So there may be a lot of candidates on the ballot. Now, California has an open primary, the kind of open primary I've been talking about recently, in which all the candidates from every party run in one primary election. The voters get to choose just one, and then the two who got the most votes go to the general election. So this can result in a lot of vote splitting because you'll have a lot of Democrats on the same ballot, a lot of Republicans, and even various independents. Let me show you my slide here on the California governor's race 2 years ago in 2022. This is from Wikipedia. And as those of you who have the video can see, there are a whole mess of candidates running in the primary, and voters had to figure out how to choose from among them. So you see here, there are about what, 4 Democrats, 14 Republicans, 7 candidates who have no party preference, even though among them there are candidates who are affiliated with one party or another, such as the American Solidarity candidate. Their preferred candidate ran as no party preference because they're not a qualified party in California or anywhere else, I think. Then there were 2 Greens on the ballot, one of whom was also endorsed by the Peace and Freedom Party, which does have ballot qualification, but in California, you can only name one party affiliation, and it has to be a party that is a so-called qualified party. And then one candidate from the American Independent Party that was also the ballot line that Kennedy ran in California in this last presidential election. But with all those, you can easily envision how, without an incumbent at the top, in that election there, you see at the very top, Gavin Newsom, the current governor of California, was the incumbent, and he got by far the most votes in the primary, almost 56% of the votes all together. But if there is not an incumbent, there are already half a dozen Democrats running, and probably there will be more who are aspiring to that office of the governor. And they may split the vote between them so that each one of them is getting a fraction of the loyal Democrats, and then Republicans will split their vote. And if other, minor parties are also splitting the vote among people who are tired of the two parties, two candidates can emerge with a relatively small percent of voter support, which is why the open primary concept, without some kind of modification allowing people to show support for more than one candidate, as they would in approval voting, is not a great system because it doesn't really show who has the most support. It just shows who has a larger group of very loyal supporters than anybody else. That doesn't have to mean anywhere near a majority or a significant share of the voters. But I look at this, and I live in California now. I'm a resident. So what I'm thinking about, I talked about my idea for having a different kind of party, which would be making nominations or endorsement for public offices and allow not only independent voters who are not affiliated with a party, but also minor party voters to participate in its nomination process or the endorsement process using star voting, which is a much better method than when you only get to choose one candidate among many candidates. You get to actually score candidates according to how much you would favor them winning that office, from 0, meaning I don't want them at all, to 5, meaning I really would like this one. You can give the same score to different candidates, or you can score somewhere in the middle, but that would be a much better system. So what I'd like to see is a party at least an initial attempt to show what this party would look like in this California gubernatorial election, to form a organization and then to set up a way to use star voting and get people to participate in the voting before the primary happens so that we can give a public endorsement. So this is the deadlines for the California governor's race, and this is going to be guiding me going into the next year, that in April 2026, we want to be all set up and ready after all the candidates have been certified for getting on the ballot, that we know who is going to be, and we will put them on our ballot unless it's a Democrat or Republican, because this is meant to be an alternative to either major party, which has enough ideological flexibility and broad support to show a candidate who can get attention and raise other issues and broaden the political conversation. So that's something I'm pretty sure I'm going to be working on going into the coming year. All right, so that's it for the Green Party and my plans. Not really a Green Party anymore, Green Party member anymore. I'm not affiliated, but I do have my own ideas about what should happen. I just don't see a route to somebody like me who has ideas that are not already totally in sync with any of the parties, to create another party, because you just end up another minor party among many. So I would want to participate with my ideas in a larger grouping, but maybe not as a candidate, but supporting candidates closer to my views and propagate from. But have other people involved with other ideas, and then we actually have a debate and discussion, and not just limited discussions to the two major party candidates who just agree on so many things, like catering to the rich and maintaining the military industrial complex. So let me turn now to, one other thing. I also talked about the independent candidate. Let me get this up on the screen so you can see the article I'm referring to. And this is from Ballot Access News. Shiva Ayyadurai was running for president as an independent, but he is not a natural born citizen. So the state of New Jersey decided he could not get on the ballot, which is interesting because the qualification where you have to be a natural born citizen is in the Constitution. And earlier this year in Colorado, there was a case that went to the Supreme Court where the Colorado Secretary of State wanted to bar Donald Trump from their ballot because he had instigated an insurrection. As they looked into it, they decided that that was true, and so that he was not qualified to be president under a constitutional provision found in the 14th Amendment. But the Supreme Court said, no, you have to have consistency across the states, and didn't really clarify a lot of issues. So how would that affect other candidates like this Shiva Ayyadurai, who was on the ballot in some states and not on the ballot in other states and raised a similar constitutional question? Well, I have to correct my earlier reporting on this, because I said the Supreme Court was going to hear his case. Actually, what it was is the Supreme Court was willing to consider whether they would hear his case. A lot of things they just turned down without even reading it. But in this case, one of the Supreme Court members at least did look through it and make a recommendation. And the Supreme Court voted not to hear this case. So we don't know how that would have come out. All right, then let's turn to the Alaska ranked choice voting contest, because I had said that ranked choice voting lost in a lot of states where they were proposing it, sometimes in combination with an open primary system, most often in combination with that. Only one state, I think, had ranked choice voting only on the ballot, and that was Oregon. Anyway, in Alaska, they've had this system of an open primary and followed by a general election with ranked choice voting for the top, I think, 4 or 5 candidates. And it looked like this was a repeal effort this year, because they already had this in Alaska for the last couple of years, and there were people who wanted to repeal it. Now, it says here that the latest count shows that the repeal is failing by just 664 votes. What kind of a margin is that? Well, again, a very close margin. From the same article, this article is from Alaska Public Media, written by Eric Stone. The final count in this chart is also from that same article. 99% of the votes in. This is earlier this week on Wednesday, when they had to finish their count of ballots. The no, that is, they did not want to repeal the ranked choice voting system, was 50.1%, 160,619 votes. And the yes was 49.9%. So that's a margin of just 0.2%. Very, very close. From further on in that article, they have this passage, and I've highlighted certain parts of it, is that the former lieutenant governor, who was an advocate for the repeal, wants the legislature to pass a law to get rid of it, as there are a lot of Republicans in the state legislature, and they're not fans of this system because in 2020, for the first time, a Democrat was elected to their sole congressional seat when the Republicans split their vote in the penultimate round of the ranked choice voting county. That was the one that you may remember because Sarah Palin was one of the Republican candidates. But they're planning to do another repeal effort if they can't get the legislature to repeal it. And there's also highlighted passages here saying the no campaign, that is, those who wanted to maintain the ranked choice voting system, got nearly $14 million in contributions, outspending the yes campaign by 100-to-1 margin. So way outspending the no campaign, but yet having a margin of difference in the final result of 0.2%. So the race is going to head for a recount, and we'll see if the outcome is any different. But a very, very close election, a lot of money on the other side. And as I was talking with Sarah Wolk about back in my video earlier this week, I did an interview with Sarah Wolk of the Equal Vote Coalition talking about why these measures failed. There's a lot of money behind ranked choice voting, and we're not sure exactly what the origin of that money is or what the intentions of the people who are donating that money are. I'm sure a lot of them simply think ranked choice voting is a good alternative to the current, the predominant way of voting we have, where each party chooses its candidate in the primary, and then you can only vote for one in the general election. Here, there's a movement both for open primaries and for ranked choice voting. But the sense is there's a lot of money behind ranked choice voting, and we don't know what's actually coming from. So I encourage you to go listen to that if you're interested in these voting reform efforts. That's about it for this week, I think. I'm not sure what we're going to be doing next weekend. That will be the race for, I did want to mention on that Alaska, one last thing on the Alaska ranked choice voting is that the candidate who would have won in 2020 for the congressional seat without that would have been Nick Begich, who was the other candidate running in the open primary against Sarah Palin and some other Republicans. And because neither of the Republicans emerged as victors, they decided this time around they're going to make sure Begich won by when the final vote of the primary came in, the open primary. If there was more than one Republican, they're going to pressure the other Republican or Republicans to drop out of the race so that they would not split the vote as they had in 2020, which means that the ranked choice voting system encouraged people to drop out so that you would not have that much of a choice in the final election. There would be fewer candidates than you thought you were going to get, only 3 or 2 even. So yeah, back to the Republican versus Democrat, you pick one, devolve back to that. All right, so next week is Thanksgiving, I think, on Thursday, and I'm not sure if I'll have something on the weekend or not. I'll check out the news sources, see what's going on, maybe check in on what I'm doing if I do anything. But I do encourage you to go over to Instagram and follow me there because I need a little boost in support. And thank you for wherever you're watching or listening. Thank you for listening. Please share with other people if you appreciate the kind of things I cover. And like and comment. I love to read your comments. People sometimes educate me, sometimes exasperate me, but always interest me what they have to say. Thanks a lot, and I'll be seeing you sometime in a week or two. Bye.
With ease, I see the chains are breaking. We've gained our focus. The moves we're making will prove to determine our self-worth as a passenger on this vehicle Earth.